This eternal life that was recognized in the great mystery system went on. And also, in the course of time, the life within the individual would revolt against the misconduct of his mind, emotions, and body. And when the great tragedy revealed itself to be the result of human selfishness, cupidity, and ignorance, the humanity would then go back to the gods, go back to the divine principle within himself, and create a new world emerging out of his own repentance, out of his own realization of his mistake, out of his own fear, perhaps, of the final destruction of himself and everything that exists. But nothing will be destroyed. It is all part of the illusion. It is an illusion which continues until the human being makes peace with universal law. When the human being accepts the governorship of the great values of life, he is then no longer subject to the infirmities of the flesh. If you look at the various sacred buildings of the world, you will notice that nearly all of them are symbols of aspiration and ascent. And for this we have to go back to the very primitive form of astronomy. The ancient astronomy divided existence into three levels, the lowest being the planes of elements, the second level being the planes of planets, and the third and higher level, the plane of the zodiac or the fixed stars. The universe had three great steps, ascending, and the life of man consisted first of a descent, as in the story of the death of Tammuz in Babylonia, and finally out of the grave of materiality, a resurrection, a regeneration, and ascent up a ladder, Jacob's ladder, or the ladder of Muhammad, to ascend, as in the vision of St. John on Patmos, to the heavenly world that lay above the zodiac. This concept was a sort of skeleton upon which all of the philosophies of ancient times were built. And the simplest way of presenting this situation was by the mound, or the pyramid, which incidentally could be a tomb, because it would then become a witness to the fact that the being in the tomb was not really dead. The tomb became then a symbol of belief in the resurrection. It was a monument to prove that it was over the body only, and that the soul, mind, and spirit had ascended into a better world. This ascent was represented in India by the use of a cube and a pyramid. The pyramid was placed on the cube to represent the union of the material quaternary and the spiritual triad. It was an ascending problem. All through the present Buddhist world, graves are in the form of little stupas or pagodas with 5 levels to represent the ascent of life, and the headstone became a ladder to lead to the higher worlds and to bear witness to the fact that the person buried there knew his own immortality and would go on to freedom and liberation. The enlightened person was always represented by a grave marker, which was the symbol of immortality and not the symbol of death. In Cambodia and in many buildings, this particular concept was created by means of a cube and a sphere. And spheres were also placed in the Great Pyramid and have been found there. Small articles to represent levels or planes, to level truly the levels of stones. A small sphere was placed upon them. If it did not roll off, the stones were true. This sphere became a dome rising from a quaternary. And this dome itself became the symbol, as far as we are concerned, of the invisible causal nature which surmounts and overwhelms and dominates the material body. Therefore, a building with a dome is a symbol of the recognition of the power of the divine over the natural life of the individual. The body below was a cube, square, or a building of cubical structure. The dome was the symbol of the overshadowing of divinity, the overshadowing, the recognition that heaven moves like a great dome forever over the surface of the earth. The earth was the cube, the dome was the heaven moving above it. And the dome gradually became the minaret, it became the steeple of the church, it became the dome of the Capitol building in Washington, the dome of the Vatican, and mysterious domes on the Muslim mosques, and the mysterious pyramid forms that we find in some Protestant churches, as in the case of the Westminster Abbey, which has the pyramid over the central entrance. All of these together represent the survival of a language that had to do with the human realization of his own nature. The pyramid stood upon the earth. It represented a flame ascending. It was a radiant structure that had been built in ancient times, but it was always pointing upward. It was always impelling the individual to follow an ascending line and look up to the stars. At various seasons of the year, by looking up, the beholder gazed upon the constellations, the figures, and the mysterious language written upon the wall of heaven. Carroll, who was the secretary of Cardinal Richelieu, wrote a book in which he showed that the star groups were in the form of consonant letters of the Chaldaic alphabet that later became the ancient Hebrew. These constellational patterns were consonants. The planets moving through them were vowels. And by studying this proposition, the handwriting on the wall of heaven could be read. It's an interesting theory and has been given some attention, but not too much in recent times. But we have the great dome of heaven moving upon the earth. We also have the pyramid as the house of a mysterious elevation, the four square of the base, from which rises the pyramidal form, consisting of 4 triangles, each with 3 sides, which make 12 lines or 12 angles, which represent the zodiac. The building was oriented to the 11th decimal point and was probably perfect at one time, but there is damage to one wall of it as a result of an earthquake. I never was quite strong enough and physical enough to climb the outside of the pyramid. Very few people are. It is really an arduous job. You have to have about 4 daggermen or natives to help you. 2 would go in front, scrambled up one of the blocks, which is about 4 feet, and pull. The other 2 are behind and push, and you are gradually elevated level by level over the hundreds of levels that lead to the top. This is a little too much for the average person, especially in the desert where the temperature is apt to be well over 100. But I did go through all of the interior rooms, the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber, and as far as we could get in the grand passageways leading downward. One thing was very evident, and has been discovered, and that is that the inside of the pyramid, the temperature, is the mean temperature of the earth. For the average person, it is colder than Christmas. It is a constant chill, and it is a dead chill. There is no modifying circumstance. And many persons who come out of the pyramid into the heat of the sun have very serious colds and occasionally pneumonia. But this peculiar deadness inside was probably put there or achieved for a purpose. It was probably in this deadness that the transcendent or suspension of life in the ceremony of the coming forth by day was performed. The individual was in the tomb. He was attended by the priests. He was dead. And like the prodigal son, whose father said, "My son was dead, but he is alive again." Humanity was the prodigal son. There were 2 ways of growing in this world. One was to grow slowly by cause and effect and by the labors of living. The world itself became a great temple in which initiation took place over a period of hundreds of lives. But to the ancients there was a wise man's way, and this wise man's way was to pass through by conscious intent and by purification the mystery of the whole cycle in one embodiment. Now one might say this would be the simple way, and I know a lot of metaphysicians at the present time who can hardly wait for that one embodiment that's going to do it all. But most of them have forgotten something, namely that this one embodiment means that everything accomplished in hundreds of lives must be accomplished in that one embodiment. It's not just a shortcut. It is a gathering up and intensifying the process of human regeneration. It means that the person must attain to a state by discipline, by dedication, and in accordance with universal law that qualifies him to receive this very important ritual. And after he has received the ritual, after he has had the experience, he is not released from responsibility, but brought into the presence of a greater responsibility. Having become, as Apuleius points out, a citizen of two worlds, the individual must act accordingly. He also learns from certain experiences along the way what he can't do and what he can do. He learns, for example, that if he is interested in primarily in his own security, he has already failed. It is not a case of where he is doing this to become nobler, more enlightened, more successful than other people. He is doing it for one purpose only, that he can be a better servant of the infinite. The ritual produces dedicated disciples of wisdom, not satisfied people who sit back and try to nurse their own intelligence. It is a case in which every step carries with it a heavy burden of duty, and that the final achievement requires the complete abnegation of personal self-interest, a complete overcoming of the problems of egoism and egotism. Otherwise, all is lost. Furthermore, there can be no backsliding, because the individual must reach a state of certainty before this enlightenment is given that makes it utterly and completely impossible to backslide. He cannot get it and then fail and turn from it. If he turns from it, it means he never had it. If he fails, he fails himself. He cannot fail the infinite. So that the rituals of the initiations of those times were very, very severe. There is an account that Thomas Taylor is said to have found in the records of the British Museum, although no proof is available of it. It is interesting, at least. Namely, that Plato was initiated in the Great Pyramid. And it was there that he received his own final enlightenment. But this presents another problem. If he was initiated in the Great Pyramid in the 4th century B.C., how did he get in? All those capstones were in place. Everything was closed. The answer would appear to be that there must be other entrances. There must be some other way of getting into the building. When Mamun, the Caliph of Baghdad, was fuddling with the pyramid, trying to get into it, it occurred to him that his native followers would probably be pretty unhappy and might very well turn against him when they found there were no treasures in there to reward them for their effort, because when they got in there, the building was empty. There was no mummy, there was no body of a previous pharaoh, although the walls had not been disturbed. And that makes it seem very unlikely that it was a tomb, primarily. But one of his natives, one of Mamun's natives, while fussing around in the excavation, suddenly disappeared, and later appeared out in the desert half mad. This seems to suggest that there was some way in or out of the building. The wall on